Hey, are you a business owner, entrepreneur, or professional? If so, we want you to apply to be a featured guest on our show. My name is Adam Torres, and I host the Mission Matters series of podcasts. I've recorded over 3,000 episodes, and we are just getting started. How do you know if you'd be a good guest to be on the show? Well, only one way to find out, and that's to apply, but I'm going to let you in on a little secret. We want guests that have a story to tell, guests with a brand, a product, or a service that can benefit my audience of listeners. If this sounds like you, go to missionmatters.com and click on Be Our Guest to apply. I'd love to talk to you and get to know more about your story. Again, head on over to missionmatters.com and click on Be Our Guest to apply. All right, now let's get into the show.
Hey everyone, welcome to another exciting episode of our Mission Matters weekly clubhouse show on our Mission Matters Club. We host it at 4 p.m. PST every Thursday. And today's topic is going to be focused on brain damage and youth contact sports, and essentially what contact sports, the impact that it can have on children. And with us, we have who has an amazing story. We're going to dive into it in regards to what impact this has had on his life and what awareness he's spreading to really showcase how this is impacting and can also benefit other people to provide more safety protocols. And we're going to dive into the details. And before we do that, just to give everyone an introduction that'll be listening in, our company Mission Matters, we're a media platform focused on the needs of entrepreneurs, executives, and experts. Our mission is to help amplify their purpose so that we can inspire and educate future generations. And part of the way that we do this is we actually have a full content marketing agency where we do podcast production work, book publishing, video editing, social media, PR, kind of combine and integrate all of that together to really help people build and craft their stories, but also get it to their right audiences. So we're able to support that on the back end. And we've launched a wide variety of shows, from 100 different podcast shows to even publishing over 150 authors, some of whom are in the audience with us today. And with that, we are going to dive right into introductions. And so I'm going to pass the baton here to Adam to lead the way. Take it over.
All right, so thank you, Chirag, as always. And Bruce, have you start out as kind of the guest of honor here, if you want to introduce yourself, please?
Sure, Adam and Chirag, thank you so much. My name is Bruce Parkman. I am the president of the Mac Parkman Foundation for Adolescent Concussive Trauma. I basically got involved with this due to the passing of my son. He took his life after struggling with mental illness, which we now know was a result of the brain damage he suffered from over a decade of contact sports, starting when he was 6 years old. So my job today is to work with Mission Matters to help them and their audience understand that, this epidemic of brain damage is basically out there for every parent whose kids are playing in contact sports. If they are not aware of the knowledge that I now have, that like me, they would be making different decisions to help protect their children. So I really want to thank the Mission Matters crew, Adam, Chirag, and your panelists and your guests for helping us, start out and get this word around, because it is, crucial knowledge for any parent to have if their kids are considering playing contact sports.
Awesome. Thank you, Bruce. And we're going to go definitely further into that and some of the things that you've taught me that maybe some people that haven't watched our interview don't know yet. So let's move on to Kumar, if you want to introduce yourself next.
I'm a student of Mission Matters First and CEO of KISS PR. We are a press release distribution content marketing company. My experience, before we talk about that, I actually work with a lot of brain injury attorneys. And incidentally, one of my clients that Adam also knows is doing a deposition for a brain injury. So I know a little bit about it from a PR perspective. I personally also had a brain injury 20 years ago. So I don't know if that's impact so far, but it was catastrophic. So I would love to learn more about what you have to offer and help amplify your story from a KISS PR perspective. I help companies and subject matter experts like you tell their story so they can get found through Mission Matters podcast and many other things that we do together.
Awesome. Thank you, Kumar. And Benjamin, I know you're in an airport, but if you can still hear me and if you want to introduce yourself, we love to get that documented.
I'm Ben Greenberg. I am with Rich Data, and I am a success story of the relationships that this group, Mission Matters, I've been very fortunate with my relationship with Chirag and Adam to find some great opportunities. I don't have much at all to provide to this topic, but I am a victim of the long COVID symptoms with neurological damage. So I'm actually very excited to listen to this and see what you guys have to talk about and what I can relate back to my struggles that I have for the last year dealing with post-COVID and the neurological damage that I've had. Even though it's not sports related, just to listen here and see what you guys think about.
Awesome. Thank you, Ben, and appreciate that. And Bruce, so maybe just to get us kicked off, or to get us started, maybe just start off by telling us a little bit to set the table. Just tell us a little bit more about just the Mac Parkman Foundation in general.
Okay, Adam, thanks. I started the Mac Parkman Foundation after my son died, only because I was overwhelmed, not only with his loss, but, the knowledge that I was finding bothered me that I didn't know about it. I mean, I'm a highly educated man. I've been a very successful entrepreneur. These are other Mission Matters stuff that we can talk about. I've founded 9 companies. I've founded international companies. I've divested 3 of them. I've been unbelievably blessed in life. But I played semi-pro sports. And to understand now that the knowledge has been out there for over a decade, that subconcussive trauma is suffered by every child that plays contact sports, and that overexposure to this trauma results in brain damage and neuroinflammation, which then causes problems with brain healing, which then leads to mental illnesses. And at the extreme end, what happened to my son. So when we started the foundation, it was all about, look, I've been very blessed. I need to get this word out. I don't know how to do this. I mean, my companies have mostly been in the government space, the defense space, now analytics software, moving into data aggregation. I don't know anything about this, but I am a loudmouth. I'm a retired Green Beret Sergeant Major as well, and I don't mind raising hell. And to find out that I no longer have my only biological son, and the knowledge exists that could have saved him, that his condition is 100% preventable, that I made bad decisions because I loved my son, because he wanted to play sports, because I wanted him to snowboard and ski with me as a lifestyle. And all this together ended up costing me my son and him his life. And to know that the information is out there that parents should have. I mean, as we talk, Adam, we tell our kids not to drink and drive, not to do drugs, how to, not to touch weapons. We teach them all to fight against, to protect them against all the risks we know of. But we can't teach our kids, we cannot protect our kids from the risks that we are unaware. And so my job is to work with Mission Matters and to leverage their platform to help me get this word out, because this is critical information that every parent would want to have, because we all love our children. And if we don't have children, we have nieces and nephews and cousins or whatever. This is just critical parental knowledge that is not available. So that's why, I've been blessed enough to, with my business experience, to put together a foundation and then start working on different means of getting this word out everywhere we can.
And so, Bruce, I think one of the things that we recently had a celebration for Mac, and we did that by participating by eating Big Macs. So anybody that follows on social media, it's, as Bruce mentioned to me in the interview, that Mac loved Big Macs, and so we all did that in commemoration. And one of the things I noticed is, in terms of some of the comments and some of the feedback, is that people are like, is this anti-sport, or is it this, or is it that? And I've had conversations with people offline and being like, no, you don't understand. Bruce I think he told me he was doing like a rugby tournament like the next week. Like, this isn't about being anti-sports or anti-contact sport. It's about is deeper than that. It's about the age, and it's about the age of the child and their brain development. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I want to start this off by saying, like, hey, you are not an anti-contact sport guy.
Adam, you're absolutely correct. I just spent this weekend running into 300-pound men, and I love contact sports. I'm a semi-professional rugby, and that's what I did in the military. And after I retired, and that's, how I came about. There is absolutely nothing wrong with contact sports, and contact sports is a great release. It's all about, when should we be playing contact sports? And the science is out there. Before the age of 14, But it's not about the concussions. The concussions are the acute side. That's an impact with syndromes, with symptoms. The problem with subconcussive activity is that there is no syndrome. There is no symptoms. So it is very difficult not only to assess the severity of a concussion or subconcussive activity, but it is now known that prolonged exposure to subconcussive activity over time is what is harming our kids. So this is not about not playing contact sports. I had a very good conversation today with a buddy who runs a youth rugby team, and after talking to me, he's going to convert them over to touch rugby because they're all under high school age. What we're saying is that before kids reach high school, in order to give them the optimum amount of time for maximum brain development, because by the time age 11 rolls around, a child's brain is at the full volume that they're going to be as an adult. But it's still plastic. It's still developing. It's still learning new neurological and motor functions. Why do we want to bang it around inside of their head? After 14, the science is there. At that time, even though you shouldn't be playing back-to-back sports, contact sports in moderation, just like the Bible teaches, is okay. So absolutely, to your point, this is not anti-contact sports at all.
And I like that you bring up the idea of that alternative. Like there's alternative means of sports, like football, there's flag football. Like you taught me a lot about that because I'll just be upfront. I'm not a big sports guy. I mean, I watch sports every here and there, but I'm more like I'll go out to watch it as an event or I'll go visit like it's playoffs or something, but I don't know much about sports to be upfront. So like there's alternatives for kids, right?
Yes, sir. And that's what we're trying to push. We just came up with a plan where we will buy the flag football kits for middle school football teams to get out there. And what's critical about touch football and a touch rugby, flag football, no contact ice hockey, even though, it's hard to avoid collisions with kids that don't know how to skate that well. My son spent most of his time on his back end. But these softer forms, whatever you want to say, of these sports, teach the kids skills they'll never get. For example, in touch rugby, you have to be quick. You have to learn to know how to fake people. You need to know where to find the holes in the line, how to pass the ball. These are skills that I never learned as a forward, as I'm the guy in the scrum. You don't learn that stuff. Flag football, you have to learn the plays. You have to learn the positions. You have to learn how to be quick. And actually, flag football is much more better for our children because it's not as sedentary as football is. I mean, it's more athletic, it's more aerobic in nature. So there are forms of these sports that exist that I think that are much more beneficial to our kids, and they have the added benefit of not exposing our kids to subconcussive exposure on a continuous basis.
And speaking of football, so again, I'm not the sports guy, but so everybody else on this call or like listening in the audience may already know this, but I didn't until you told me. So you mentioned something about like at the college level, how they practice. And then you mentioned like at the pro level, like expand on that a little bit for some other people that may be listening to this that didn't know that also, because when you told me this, I was shocked. I'm like, what? They're doing this, but yet we have our kids out there doing something different. Like, how's that even possible?
Yeah, and this is something that's brought up. So, a long story short, the Concussion Legacy Foundation is the predominant supporter of non-concussive sports. They also run the brain bank for the NHL, NFL, for the military. My son is actually up there with them. They made me aware in conversation that the Ivy League football, what do you call it? They get the Pac-10, their conference. In their conference, they have no contact practice during the year and minimum contact practice during the preseason. The NFL, I was made aware, restricts their teams to 15 minutes of contact per week during the season. And to my knowledge, there is not one high school or one middle school that I'm aware of, and there could be a few out there, that practices no contact skills. And when we start talking about no contact football, that's going back to the flag football days. Is that, okay, you have no contact, you're learning skill. It could be a good start for middle schools to maybe get away from exposing our kids to trauma. But then in the football games, they're going to have those hard hits. It's better just to avoid it altogether. But the great purpose of no contact skills is the minimizing of subconcussive contact. But this is going on at the college levels. at the NFL, the professional levels, but it's not going on when it matters the most is, where the kids are. And, we'll talk about CT a little bit later, but every one of these horrific, suicides by professional athletes that are taking their lives and college athletes, these guys all started their concussive journey as a child. And we just had a wrestler, her last name was Unger. She took her life as a result of, she was a professional wrestler with the chairs and smacking each other and again, but she started early. So it's all about taking the trauma out of these kids till they're ready to absorb it. But yeah, that's an absolute fact, Adam.
And then something else that you mentioned is essentially like, okay, so this is the obvious one, right? So if somebody's playing football, then we know that at a young age, we know there could be some challenges there, some potentials for injury, right? But then maybe like some of the less known things. So there might be some parents listening to this right now that are like, oh yeah, my kid, I won't let them play football. That's dangerous, right? But then there might be some other things that you've mentioned that are not, considered sports that normally have this type of risk, but maybe they're softer in terms of, I don't know if I'm using the right word, but they're softer in terms of some of the impacts to the brain. But if you combine that with a regimen of going from sport to sport to sport with no like relaxing or no breaks in between, that like the effects can be just as detrimental, I believe you mentioned. So tell us a little bit more about like what that looks like.
Yeah, Adam. I mean, one of the things that we found out after the fact that it wasn't just the sports that my son was playing, but he was a snowboarder and he was skiing. He's been skiing with me since he was 4 years old. Snowboarding and skiing, particularly snowboarding, snowboarders crash a lot. Yet, as parents, they're wearing a helmet. You're falling in snow, sometimes ice, but you don't really look at snowboarding as a highly concussive event until you lay it on top of another sport or a back-to-back sport such as my son. But there are recreational activities like parkour, skateboarding, snowboarding, motocross, biking that, that have some concussive impacts and subconcussive impacts when these kids, hit their heads. And over time, those injuries, if they're, correlating with, if they're adding on to a sports season, a concussive sport like football, because these are year-round activities, not really snowboarding, but you can skateboard year-round. You can motorbike year-round, motocross, motorbike years-round. You can go jump around buildings if you want. You got karate, you got judo, where you're martial arts, kendo, where you're smacking each other with sticks, even though you got headgear on. But you start adding all this up, and that's what's missing from I think our perspective as parents. As we look at each sport individually, we see, all right, he's playing football. All right, now he's wrestling or he's snowboarding. He's got the best protective gear. Wrestlers play on mats. My son had headgear on every time. Our school went out and bought NFL Riddell helmets, the best helmets on the market. And then my son wore a helmet when he snowboarded, but my son still got hurt. And here's the other scary fact about this, is my son had 3 concussions, 2 moderate, 1 mild. He never lost consciousness. He was cleared, all 3 of them. They were in 3 different seasons, way far apart. Yet his last concussion before he passed away was over 3 years earlier. So it appears that once this damage is done, it keeps going. Even if there's no other concussive events, the subconcussion that my son endured in sports kept his injured brain from healing properly and resulted in mental illness. So, yeah, I mean, but there are other sports that we look at as being, don't worry about it, I don't play football. But if your kid's flying out over the handles of a motocross bike or, crashing, snowboard, whatever, these are considerations that when you start looking at the aggregate of what's going on, it might be something to consider, take a look at, or monitor more closely.
And so we had these, so the Mac, I want to circle back to the Mac Parkman day and kind of some of the things that were done during the day. And I just noticed like this amazing community that has kind of circled around. And I saw the like picture after picture on the event page of like everyone eating Big Macs and kind of celebrating the memory of Mac and also wanting to spread the word. Tell me a little bit more about how that day went for you.
We have 2 events a year. One on his birthday and then one on the anniversary of his passing to the Lord. And Mac loved his Big Mac sandwich. He loved McDonald's, and I know every morning I eat when we lived up in the mountains of Woodland Park, and we had a 45-minute drive to his school down in Colorado Springs. Well, there was a McDonald's on the way, and every morning for years, if I wasn't on a business trip, we were there getting our egg white delights. He would get his egg McMuffin and his tater, those fried tater things, and we'd get 2 large Diet Cokes, and we wouldn't tell Mom, right? We'd head down the mountain. To learn how to drive, he would drive, and then we would, and it was our father-son time, and we'd talk and chatter. He would just listen to his music, I'd listen to mine, but we were together. And so when the last event we had was on his birthday, our son was colorblind, always mismatched his socks, never. So we had mismatched socks for Mac Day, and my daughter, Allie, sent in a picture of a Big Mac for Mac. And I'm like, all right, that's what we're going to do on September 24th. So, yeah, it was a great turn. I ended up buying like 30 Big Macs for the rugby team. And we took a picture under the thing. And for my boy, because lime green was the one form of green that he could see, we all wore a lime green sock and a black sock with our uniforms that week. And but that's how it came about. And I cannot thank you enough for your participation in that day, Adam. It meant a lot to me and my family. That was awesome to watch you, to devour that Big Mac with that shirt on, man. It was so great. It was so powerful. Thank you so much.
Oh man, it was fun. And I ate 2 Big Macs. That was take 2 you saw. I was like, the first one was a warm up. I was like, what? I get to eat 2? I'm in. Oh, it's funny. So what has been, I know as you get the message out, and the main thing here, and this is kind of some of the comments I had on social media that were posting things like that. And I actually did quite a bit of copy and paste from your website to answer comments to other people, just so that I could get your wording right and everything accurate. And something in your wording, and so I wanted to kind of highlight something here, because this gets back to what I was trying to kind of convey and try to do my best part to convey to the people that were commenting and wanted more information. That the main thing about the foundation, again, it's not anti-contact sport. It's not we don't want kids playing sports. The idea is, I'm going to read this verbatim just so that we have it on the audio part of this recording, and so that people listening can refer back to it. And anybody that is listening to this, if you want to read this or get any more of the information on the Mac Parkman Foundation, P as in Mac Parkman, fact, FACT.com, again, mpfact.com. But I'll read the mission briefly, because this is, it's really creating a community around this information. Like, that's the goal. So it says, our mission: to serve as a source of information, resources, and communication to the community of parents, coaches, athletic trainers, and medical staff that require knowledge about sports-related subconcussive trauma, and to raise awareness of the long-term implications of concussive and subconcussive trauma to our children, to include physical pain and emotional/mental health issues such as depression, personality disorders, and other mental health issues. We will support this mission through collaboration with other sports, medical, educational, and military organizations, advertising, fundraising, and communications. So as I was kind of doing my job to kind of copy paste some of this branding in terms of, so I could respond to the comments in an intelligent way, and in a way that represented the Mac Parkman Foundation correctly, in my opinion. The thing is, the key words here to me is community of parents, coaches, athletic trainers, medical staff. Like, this is about creating a dialogue and letting everybody come together. Like, this isn't about, dividing people, or your kids shouldn't play sports or all these other things. It's about like giving everyone the information, creating the community around it, and finding ways to protect our kids. Can you maybe just talk a little bit more about the community aspect and just the mission? I did want to read it verbatim though, just so I had it documented.
And that's, the foundation exists to build a community. We are not the subject matter experts, but we send people to them. And the reason the community is so important, right now we have this foundation is all about children. And I believe that everything we do as people, politicians, parents, should be about our kids. And with the passing of my son, I realized that if my son, with the blessings I've had in life, could end up in this predicament, there are a lot of other children in it. and that, we also have a society where contact sports is just a part of being America. As a matter of fact, I had one person comment to me that we are the only nation in the world that has such a devotion towards contact sports, particularly at the youth age amongst our, other than the rugby nations. Most other nations around the world do not even don't even have football. They don't have rugby. They might participate in wrestling, but it's such a minute percentage. But so the intent is to, yes, let parents know there is nothing wrong with contact sports, but there are critical decisions you should be making as a parent to protect your child, and that the science is there. It's not well disseminating. As I've been writing a book that's a concussion survival guide for parents, and I've been doing a lot of research, which hurts me as a father because I'm finding knowledge out there that, gosh, if I would have known this, I would have made such different decisions. And the problem is the knowledge is all in these medical research papers. Sometimes you got to pay for the darn things. So it's not common knowledge. It's not in the curriculum for our athletic trainers. It's not trained to doctors. We just found out there's hardly any CTE trained coroners in America, which means when you have an untimely death, who is even helping the parents understand that your son, your daughter could have taken their life, or they could have passed on, or they could have overdosed because they were struggling with a brain injury. And without this education, this knowledge becoming a part of our educational system, part of our parenting system, without this becoming part of the people that we trust, the circle of trust of trainers and coaches and doctors that we as parents trust with our children, if they don't have this knowledge, then how are we as a society better protecting our kids? And in one of my chapters, I call it the tip of the iceberg. And the tip of the iceberg is CTE. That's what everybody knows about. Everybody knows about concussions. But there's this huge chunk of this iceberg under the surface where we have millions and millions of children that for the last 40 years have been allowed to play contact sports at ages where their brain has been at the optimal point of development. And we have no idea to this day how many of these children who might have been incarcerated, might have left us early, might have aggression problems, might have whatever their issues are as they grew older. How many of these kids could trace their problems back to starting sports, contact sports at too young age? So that's what we're trying to do, is just to get the word out. People have to make decisions, protect their kids. But yes, it is a community, and we're slowly expanding it as people wake up and say, wow, I didn't know this exists.
How has been as you're getting out there, as you're going further and further and kind of spreading the message? I'm just curious, and this is a question I was able to ask you before. It didn't come up to me until quite some time after our discussion, as it was kind of noodling around in my head, is how have you been received? How is this information received on the organizational level? And not to pick on schools or anything like that. That's not what I mean, but I feel like it's got to be quite you're going very counterculture. Like you said, as you mentioned, in the US, contact sports is just a way of that's how I was raised, how many other people were raised. And it's really counterculture to what it's been like. How have you been received by, let's just say on the organizational level, by schools, school districts, things like that?
Well, to date, I have emailed schools and PTAs to ask them to talk on the subject. I have not been accepted. My school, where Mac played, I am getting ready to approach them with, the option of going to flag football. To my knowledge, outside of sending a concussion awareness package out, my school really hasn't done any learning beyond this. So we're getting ready to have a more powerful conversation. During this weekend at the rugby tournament, talking to my guys, my people I played rugby with, they were very receptive of touch rugby because we played it all. They this makes absolute sense. I had one gentleman reach out to me. His son was 15. He's like, dude, tell me what I need to know. And we've had parents pull their kids. So it seems that when the parent has a younger child, they're receptive to what we have to say because it's information, it's logical, it makes sense. When we start dealing with organizations, we had a meeting with the National Foundation of High Schools. They were like, yeah, that's kind of important, but we've already built this concussion thing with the CDC. And when I mentioned the fact that, that's about concussions. We're not talking about concussions. We're talking about subconcussive exposure. And I think what the problem is, Adam, is that everybody understands that this exists, but there are no statistics. There's been minimal research. There's no guidance for parents. And this is one of the most poorly understood impacts of contact sports on kids right now. And I think it's just the absolute lack of knowledge that kind of scares people. They're like, oh my God, have I allowed my child to do this, or the schools, what is my liability, right? If this becomes an issue, like we can, the science goes to court one day, and it becomes known that, look, this is now a legitimate, reason to sue or whatever. That's the only thing that might, produce some change. But for the most part, we've been well received with the parental communities, kind of ignored so far with the schools. But I think as we get this book published, as we get the video, we just did an amazing video with American Airlines talking about the connection with contact sports. That's going to be played throughout the holidays on every American Airlines jet. As we learn from working with Missions Matters, how to get this word out, and how to get communities engaged. I think, from the parental side, great engagement, great topic, because these are our kids. I think from the organizational perspective, I think there's a little bit of fear out there of this actually becoming, a well-known, phenomena and a negative outcome of contact sports. I think there's a little bit of fear there right now because it is counterculture.
Yeah, I can completely see that. I was curious as I went away from our initial interview, and I was like, man, I wonder what people are like, how you're being received, because it's so counter to the system that's already created. And I'm like, I know it's a tough road, and not saying to change anything you're doing, but my random ideas, I was, again, kind of noodling on this, is I'm like, man, if Bruce is really going to get like the change for people, I'm like, what's the low hanging fruit here? It's almost like you have to get to the audience before they get into where those sports are. So I mean, as early as like preschool and daycare, like when parents are, especially for when they're first getting in, start and planning their kids, like before they get into the system of the contact sports, it's almost like you have to go that young from the standpoint of educating the parents so that they'll know this before they get into the age where a kid can play one of these sports already at school and it's already acceptable. It's like, man, you almost have to hit it from both ends.
Yes, sir. Yeah, you're absolutely right. My son has impacted so many people right now, just because it's that have found out about it, because they're like, oh my God, this happen. Mm-hmm. This could, because the parallel is this could happen to my kid. Mm-hmm. So you're, from the parental perspective, parents, I remember when my son was born, I'm like, all right, how do I hold him? I'm just a dude, man. I'm like, oh my God, I'm a dad now. This was not in any textbook. This was not in any self-help manual. This was not on the internet. It is still not. And it is my mission, so help me God, to get this out there for parents to understand what the risks are. And then when their kid is ready, there is nothing like Friday night lights. I mean, being in those stands with my son playing football was absolutely one of the most amazing things I've done. And I thank them for that. And I thank them for allowing me to be a football parent and a wrestling parent, because so few parents get to enjoy this. And it was an amazing experience, but it was not worth the cost. And I would have still had those Friday night lights. My son still could have been here, and he still could have started football at 14 and would have started on that team. But he wanted to play football in 7th grade. His friends were playing football. He wanted to play football. His friends wrestled. He wanted to play wrestle. I thought I was just being a good parent. And I was a very, very uninformed one. And that's what we want to change.
No, it's well said, and I'd like to just open it up. Maybe if anybody else just has some questions here. So if you have questions, my main thing was I definitely wanted to bring Bruce on, and I wanted him to have this to leverage our platform and to record this and distribute it and just keep the conversation going. And Robert, welcome. I see you got the little megaphone like celebration thing on your picture, meaning I believe you're newer to Clubhouse. So welcome.
Yeah, hey, how's it going? This is a really interesting conversation you guys have going on, because I just don't think that it's really spoken about that much. And it's really prevalent. It's a little bit more on people's minds, but I still don't think people really understand what the true sort of underlying danger is for this sort of thing. But it's nice to hear you guys talking about it. It's nice to hear things that you're doing there, Bruce, to bring this more to light.
Hey, Robert, thanks, man. And I will say that, people are starting to become familiar with CTE, which is chronic traumatic encephalopathy, but they associate it with the collegiate athletes and the NFL athletes that are taking their lives, sometimes at 50, sometimes at 60. We just had a rugby guy tell us about a fellow classmate, took his life just last weekend, but he was a West Point linebacker. He was known for leading with his head. He developed, ALS, and so people don't associate mental illness or these side effects of CTE with children. And I think that's what we have to change, is that all these athletes that are the subject of these documentaries and these horrific stories of these unbelievably successful leaders of men and women hurting themselves, they all started back when they were kids. This journey started when they were kids. And then with my son's case, because he played so much of it, it just accelerated his to the point where he had to leave. He was a very enormous emotional pain. And so, yeah.
Absolutely. I played D1 football, and we had a bunch of friends who went AWOL, where we like, hey, where did X go or where did Y go? And they just wouldn't return guys' calls and this. And, we were now in about our 30s, and it didn't make sense to us because these are highly charismatic, highly intellectual people who are successful. And then all of a sudden, they just start going into these dark spaces. And then the CTE story started to come out, and it made sense. When I was young, we had this saying, get your nose up in there. And that meant you're supposed to smack with your head, the top of your head. I remember I was 8 years old. I was playing a game. I hit this guy, and I was actually seeing stars all over the place. I went to the sidelines. I said, hey, coach, I'm seeing stars. And he said, way to go, Hartt. That's because you're hitting well. And he backs his hand up, and he slaps me as hard as he can across the helmet. He goes, go get him. So I go back in. I tell my friends, hey, I'm seeing stars. They're like, oh, cool. So I go to headbutt like half of my teammates to celebrate the stars, and then just play the rest of the game.
And this is the culture that we're trying to change, Robert. So you see this, right? And it is, I like to hear this. Everybody says, well, we got to teach boys how to be men. Well, I took young men and made them soldiers. 21 years, I was a Green Beret. You can before a boy becomes a man, he's got to learn to be a good boy. And between the ages of 7 and 11, when that brain is at its most vulnerable state, that is not the time to go smacking people around and hurting that fragile, critical organ that's going to drive you for the rest of your life. But I'm laughing because I saw it at rugby, and it is just so, it's just so part of what we do. And, you watch Pop Warner is the most significant violator of this under 14 rule. And these coaches, they sell themselves as some kind of, we're the last bastion of Sparta, Greek gods, whatever. We're fighting Greeks. We're going to teach these kids how to be men. There's nothing wrong with teaching young boys how to be men when they're ready for it. And to hark on your point a little bit more, but that's a good story. I'm going to remember that. I'm going to use it too, if you don't mind.
It's interesting. This work that you're doing, it's fascinating. It's needed. I think if you're interested, there's another layer you might want to bring to it about talking about some proactive things that athletes can do if they are going to choose this path, because many are still going to. Awareness meditation is one of the better tools that an athlete can use, because it's one of the few techniques that has scientifically been proven to build more gray matter density, specifically in our frontal lobe. And this is some of the area where we get affected. So there's two things that it can do for an athlete. The first thing, because it can set up a benchmark, because the athlete's more aware of themselves and their consciousness, they're better able to judge how much they're getting impacted by concussions or what's happening with them. But also, if you're playing these sports, whether it's hockey or soccer or football especially, you can be using this as an insurance policy, because if you're playing that sport, you know that this comes along with it. But if you start packing more gray matter density the earlier you can, though, that's something that also can be valuable for people. The other side benefit is it's incredible for enhancing sports. your athletic ability.
We would love to connect with you on that, because we are looking, and you brought up a good point, is that these athletes don't even know what a concussion is. I mean, they think that you got to be knocked out. So the majority of concussions go unreported. At least 50% of the concussions that are not seen in our emergency rooms go unreported because the kids don't know that those dizziness or those stars in your case is a sign of a concussion. So by educating them on what concussion and what some of the side effects of prolonged subconcussive exposure are, or just prolonged concussive symptoms, it sounds like as they're practicing what you're talking about, they could be aware for some of these symptoms that they might not think are associated with their sports background, but that I must be sick, or I've got, I'm ill, or I'm dehydrated, and that's why I feel this way, or, I'm just broke up with my girlfriend, or whatever it is that's making them not feel optimal. So I think that, combining those skills that you're talking about with the awareness of, if I'm feeling some of these, feeling like this could be a sign that I'm pushing too hard and I need some rest. I think that could be incredibly beneficial to the community that we're trying to build.
Absolutely. I love speaking about this. It's kind of what I'm focused on in my life right now, as far as like bringing together health and performance in a combination. So yeah, I'd love to speak about it. There's a lot of interesting things happening in mind performance that weren't really known before, but are really interesting techniques that can help people, and then also help them with some of the tougher things they might bump into, like you're talking about, for the people who didn't have this earlier, if they're suffering from different types of things on the mental health side of stuff. There's a lot of tools, because pharmaceutical is good. It's a necessary thing in some cases, but there's no bridges for people to get off of those things and to stabilize themselves more. So yeah, I'd love to talk with you guys about that stuff.
Okay. Yeah, my daughter's a nurse practitioner of psychiatric medicine, and she just spoke on the topic of sports and mental illness and subconcussive trauma. And she was unbelievably well received, where she's going to speak at the national conference. And some of the questions were, this is all new to us. The raw science, the data is not really there for us to make a decision. But they were also looking for other techniques that they could offer, these individuals, that now that instead of just saying, all right, I'm seeing you because you have a mental illness, now they can diagnose them as a mental illness possibly related to their sports-related concussion or their concussive past. And then they can offer them tools like yours that can help them, get back on their feet without a lot of this pharmaceutical help that just seems to be the go-to for mental health right now. I do believe that other alternatives are definitely needed.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'm not against pharmaceutical. I think it has its place, but I think you also need to complement it. So is it okay if I talk about what I do in this sort of space? I don't want to take too much of the time. Yeah?
Yeah, feel free to go for it.
Okay. I have a company. It's called PIVA, and it's PIIVA. And what we do is we design mind performance techniques. And what that is when you take multiple mind performance techniques and you bring them together. So in our case, we have things like meditation, breath work, biofeedback, visualization, compassion training. And when you combine these things, they have a sort of an accelerating effect where they get into the person's body quicker, and they amplify two things, mainly their focus and their cognitive abilities and their overall performance. Because what they do is they enhance a person's awareness. So a person has enhanced awareness of their environment, their reaction time, and also their body. So it's a new way of thinking about sports performance. I think it's going to be one of the biggest next waves, because if you look at like Tom Brady or Serena or LeBron, they're all using these techniques and they all talk about them, but there's not many companies like ours that bring all these different techniques together and make it in something that's engaging. Because that's the thing is, these techniques alone, most athletes and many people won't just be saying, hey, I want to do a whole bunch of meditation and breath work. They find it boring. But if you wrap it in the context of this is going to enhance your sports and your business acumen and your academics, then all of a sudden they get very interested in it. And the nice thing is, because people don't do anything in the mind performance space, they have big boosts. So players can see themselves increase their performance, like in some cases 10, 20% over 2 months, not their speed and their strength, but their core skills, because these different techniques activate certain parts of the brain. But with the studying and the research that's being done, specifically on meditation, they're using MRIs and fMRIs. So with the fMRIs, they're looking at the functionality elements. There's frontal lobe, which is all of our thinking. There's occipital lobe, which is for our seeing. There's also the cerebellum that's being affected, and also part of our brainstem, which is for our parasympathetic system. But they also found that in those regions, you're also building up your gray matter density. So you're both increasing your function and also increasing, in essence, your processing power for those. One of the cool things about that is that when it comes to the parasympathetic system, we actually start to learn how to sleep deeper. And this is where we do all of our rejuvenation. So you have people who have better well-being, better rested, and then they're better in their given sport. So they're more encouraged to do that. And that's kind of why we built the company, because we said for people just as standalone things, they wouldn't. But if you can show them, hey, you can have these fantastic performance increases, then all of a sudden you get excited. And we have like teenagers telling their parents, hey, I'm going to skip some screen time because I'm going to do some extra exercises in PIVA.
If you can get teenagers away from their screen, you got something going on. I'd love to know more from the foundation. And, my wife is very, she's a very spiritual healer, deals with a lot of modalities. So she's always looking for new things, very interested. And as a foundation, as we start talking to coaches and giving them alternatives for rest and performance outside of just beating each other up on the field, how about sitting in a room and getting your stuff? I think there could be some very favorable outcomes up there. So it sounds like you're doing amazing work, and really appreciate the description of what you're doing. It sounds very, very interesting, sir.
Thanks a lot, Bruce. Yeah, Ben came into this room and he said, hey, Robert, something interesting is going on. And I came in here and I was just fascinated that you guys were talking on this topic.
So first off, everybody that's listening to this recording, I think you just caught it from Chirag that we meet every week on Thursday at 4:00 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. I'll just repeat that. It's the Mission Matters Club. And if anybody wants to check it out or to participate, of course, we'd love to have you. And other than that, I'll let Chirag do the final words.
Yeah. So next week's episode is going to be focused on what is the process to reinvent yourself. And so we have another expert panelist with Arnold Volcker, whose business focuses on this, and he's been doing this for the last 20 some odd years.
Awesome. Arnold's going to do this? Oh, you guys got to show up. Let me tell you something about Arnold briefly. This guy's story, we're publishing him in one of our upcoming books. What was it? His grandfather was like an inventor and invented this like farming machine. I don't know. You have to come to hear the full thing, but I interviewed him and he started this whole platform on helping people become inventors, like based off of what they're doing. And like, you have an idea, but how do you get that off the ground? He's got some crazy stories. Sorry, Chirag, I got excited. Go ahead. We were supposed to be ending this. Sorry. Arnold's awesome. I didn't know he was up next week. That's great.
Yeah, so he's our next show, October 7th, same time, 4 p.m. PST. Definitely join us, and, we'd love to welcome all of you back and, continue the dialogue, keep contributing. Again, these conversations are recorded, so we will be sharing it with everyone here, and should have it going live here soon.
Awesome. And Bruce, thank you again for coming. We really appreciate it, and we appreciate the opportunity to help spread your message, so thank you.
The next stage of our relationship, and I'll be talking to you about that. Thank you so much for the time today.
Absolutely. You got it. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Awesome.